Welcome to Mum Days, a beautiful collective of mamas and experts sharing wisdom, inspiration, and life hacks to support us on this journey through the hazy days of motherhood. Welcome back to the Mom Days podcast. My name is Holly Lowe and I am your host. And we are in the middle of a series right now that I love discussing, everything to do with reproductive health and well-being for women. And I have the absolute privilege today of speaking with Nat Kringoulis, who I have to say a little bit fangirling today because I have loved listening to your podcast and following you on Instagram and all of that. And so I was just telling you, so is my daughter. So I am really, really pleased to have you with us. I'm really grateful to have you. And I need to tell you, I need to share this because some of these things I didn't even realize as I was reading through some of your information. But you are a 2-time best-selling author, which I did know, amazing books, 2-time podcast host, and of course, an incredible advocate for women's health and just natural options. I would love for you to tell us just briefly, what is it that you do in Australia? What is your practice like? And, what's your passion in that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've been a practitioner. My background is Chinese medicine, and also I've studied acupuncture as well. And way back when nobody was treating women's health, we didn't choose this space. I didn't choose the space of women's health. We were influxed with women that didn't have answers, and it was more to do about fertility. It wasn't so much to do with hormones in general. But I didn't have the answers for these women. They couldn't explain what their symptoms were. Their doctors couldn't explain what their symptoms were. And really, to cut a long story short, it came down to the fact that they were experiencing symptoms as a result of their modern lifestyle, but science and medicine hadn't quite caught up to these being the reasons that we were seeing these
Mm,
symptoms. So, sure, I think as women, we understand that women can be I guess, more vulnerable when it comes to things like period pain, and other challenges to do with our reproductive and gynecological health. But I don't think we looked at the bigger picture. We weren't looking at how our skin might be related to our hormones, or how our ovulation pain might be related to what was going on within our body. So really just peeling it back. And I think for so long we've treated a symptom rather than looking at the why. And I started asking why. And there weren't a lot of people doing that at the time. And it wasn't because I thought, oh, this is a good idea to ask why. It was because that's what my training in Chinese medicine definitely was all about, the root cause. Now, fast forward almost 20 years, and I think it makes sense that we look for the root cause. But back then, no one was doing it. And so it really just put us on the map, and we grew very quickly in the clinic to a capacity that I very quickly outgrew. And I didn't have the structure for that. I didn't have the team for that. And so we went from being, a one-man band to suddenly having a suite of practitioners. And then of course I have to become you know, a leader and a manager to all of those. But with that came a widened audience. And it was at the time where social media was just flourishing. And I guess we got to position ourselves on socials as well. And that just went from strength to strength. So it allowed us to go ahead and identify where the gaps were in the market to create things like books and podcasts and products and services. And really, if you know anything about me, I just love to talk. So it became very easy
I love it.
create a platform that I just got to talk on, and here we are.
That's perfect. I love it. We all like to hear ourselves talk. That's a fact. Especially when you
What
have a
we
message, right? You have something to
well,
share.
totally, totally. So, I mean, again, it just all has evolved. None of this was planned. It really wasn't, and I feel really privileged to be able to now have created several really strong brands where we get to just help people live better lives, help women understand their bodies better. And I think even to the point that you were talking, Holly, is really for me now it's about this next generation. Like, how can we be the best example for this next generation? Because there's this massive opportunity for change. And I think it's happening, and that's really exciting.
Absolutely. And that's what excited me when I knew we were going to get to speak because that's what we did. Our last few episodes have been with, talking about the next generation, talking about how things have changed in their options. And we've come so far in our knowledge, and yet I think on the medical side we haven't. Like you said, it's still squeaking along, trying
It's
to
still, yeah,
catch
it really
up.
is still a symptom by symptom process,
Yes.
and symptoms are your best clues, but we don't just treat a symptom, we treat a problem, and I think that's where a lot of women feel that they've been misled or failed, because they're thinking that they're treating something all the while, we're talking about something like birth control,
Mhm.
all the while they've just been masking their symptoms, so they come off the pill only to find not only are the symptoms there, but they come rushing back tenfold.
Right.
Um, so imagine if we lived in a world where at the time where we started to see issues arise, especially for young girls, we knew how to tackle that. And it is different to what we would do as a 20 or 30-year-old. But these are just phases. I was speaking to somebody in the clinic yesterday and she sat down and she's like, "Oh, so I've just been diagnosed with perimenopause." And I said, "Sorry, you can't be diagnosed with perimenopause. It's like being diagnosed with puberty. Like, you don't sit down and go, "Oh, well, I've got bad news. You've got puberty." Do you know what I mean? It is so much misinformation and still so much misinformation by our health providers because we're still learning. And so, I always love the fact that we get to borrow from complementary medicine.
Yes.
And so often this becomes mainstream. And so often it's the conspiracy theories and the wacky ideas and the, outside of the box that 10 years down the track, we're like, oh, this is happening now. So I think
Absolutely. We always
we
say
can
that
look.
the difference between truth and a conspiracy right now seems to be about 6 months.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's really
You
has
know?
yeah, it's really sped up in my experience. But yeah, totally. So all of those theories that once upon a time that, were very much told weren't true or weren't fact yet, all have become that. So, I think we can look back on and learn the lessons from what we've already gone through, definitely.
Absolutely. So I would love to know again, just because we've had these conversations and we're going to have more of them. We have, some younger girls and ladies are going to be on the podcast in the next little bit to ask their questions and share some of their experiences. What age do you think we should be, having these conversations?
Oh, I just love this question and to start off here is just lights me up. Um, from the age that kids start asking, and I don't think this is not specific to a female gender. This is
Yes.
specific to all genders. From an age that a child starts to ask questions, is the time that we get to give them the information, and because they're ready to learn at that point in time. And obviously, it's an age appropriate discussion and it's an evolution and it evolves. It's a discussion that continues to evolve over time. So I think it's so important because for so long it's been so taboo to talk about the, especially reproductive and sexual health has been so taboo to talk about when it's a fact of life. It's pretty much the only thing we don't actually talk about. And I think that's also because as adults, we've had an emotional or an experience that is attached to emotions when it comes to especially sex and intercourse, which is then obviously linked to the question, where did I come from? But I think we do such a disservice to ourselves and to our children by not having these truthful conversations, all being age appropriate. So a 4-year-old asks, "Mum, how did I get in your tummy?" We love to make up all sorts of stories. The doctor put you there, the stork delivered you. I mean, really, for a 4-year-old, imagine hearing a bird came and dropped you off on your doorstep. It's horrific. It's horrific. So
Absolutely.
so I don't think we need to lie to our children. I think it's a beautiful opportunity. They give you the cues when they're ready to learn. And a 4-year-old, you can generally say, Dad has sperm, Mummy has an egg, and they get together and that becomes a baby. Most 3 or 4-year-olds will go, "Oh, okay,
Yeah.
makes sense." If they need more information and they ask for more information, they are a curious child, which I don't think at this point you would probably know that already. And they are ready to learn more information. And I think so long as there's this age appropriate evolution of
Right.
conversation, you don't get to being a 13-year-old girl and this bombshell of periods being dumped on you, like you're supposed to know what that is all of a sudden, and because it is, it's a mysterious when you, and because you've at by the age of 13 you have some idea, but it's been put together by your friends and it's this
Yeah.
convoluted idea of what sex is, what your vagina is like, so I think we get to continue to do this, and I think, look, I've got a 13-year-old. She's gone through, pos ed and sex ed and all of that at school. And I have to say, it's definitely better than what we received. Like,
Oh, yes.
we got the banana and the condom in year 8, and it was a don't have sex, you'll get pregnant type of scenario. There was no connection between
Right.
what happens in a reproductive cycle and a menstrual cycle, and none of that connection was ever made. But I'm so excited for her because she got to have these conversations, and I don't think I actually even started young enough with my children because I've really only been on this path more recently to help people to actually uncover this. It happened when I wrote Beautiful You. I realized that we were missing out on this beautiful opportunity to allow this to be something to go together. Also, that takes immense pressure off you as a mother or an adult or a parent or a loved one, if you're allowing that to just be something. Your
Yes.
kid walks in the bathroom and you're changing your pad or tampon. Mummy, what are you doing? Beautiful opportunity to explain to them in an age appropriate way. I know that even for Olivia, she didn't realize we never gave it a name to begin with, but we always talked about, the lining comes away and the whole process of what that was. She at the time didn't realize it was bleeding, but when she had a sex ed class at school, she's like, "Mum, when the lining comes away, you actually bleed." And I was like, "Yes, you do." And so, you know what I mean? It was just this conversation that continued
Right.
to happen and still continues to happen. Um, and she's a funny example because she's very immature in her mind for a 13-year-old. She's not a mature 13-year-old, which I'm not mad about, by the way.
Exactly.
Um, but it still doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how mature, how much of an old soul your child might be. You can still have these conversations and make everybody's lives better for the future. And I just
Yeah.
don't think we've done that before.
Agreed. Absolutely. We always laugh about this in our family because I have a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and my daughter's right in the middle there. And we were in London one time and in the Natural History Museum, and they have this beautiful section in there on human, like just development. And it's really well done. And we've homeschooled for many years or traveled and had tutors and whatnot. So they've never gotten to that age yet where they've been in those kind of classes. So I've had the privilege of being able to teach them at whatever age they started asking the questions. However, it's a little tricky when I had a 5-year-old at the time who had a very curious, 11-year-old brother and sister, and he would always be going, la la la, I don't want
I
to know
know.
this. I
But
don't need
also,
this.
how
But
amazing that
now
he
he knows
knew that
as
he
much as they do.
Right, but also how amazing that he knew that he wasn't ready to hear that. Like,
Yes.
that's okay too, right? It's sort of
Yeah.
I don't hide anything from my 10-year-old. And at the time that we started talking to Livy more about this, it was definitely many years ago. And he kind of just would tune out. And I knew he was tuned out. But
Yeah.
there was still this conversation in the background about a period or whatever it might be. And I I do remember one day Livy coming home from school, and I actually was mortified. She sat down in the yard and she said to me, "Mum, today," no, she goes, "I've got one word that I need to talk to you about." And I said, "Oh, okay, so sure, sweetie." And she goes, "It's the word period." And I said, "Oh, well, we've been talking about your period." And she said, "I know we have, but the teachers collected all the upper school girls today. So what were they like, 10 and 11?" And put us all in a room and we talked about the period and we're going to give it a name. It's going to be called our unicorn. And if we get it, we need to go to the teacher and we can say, "I've got my unicorn." I said, "Oh, that's great."
Yeah.
And she said, "No, but it's not because they also told us that we're probably going to be moody. It's probably going to be painful and it's going to be pretty awful." And I said, "Sorry."
Wow.
No, so it was like, oh, this is an opportunity, or this was the opportunity for a conversation that I was waiting to have with her that I didn't get to have with her. And I had to try and reassure her and
Yeah.
untangle that in her
Undo
brain,
what they did. Yeah.
right? But
Mm.
then also my heart broke for the teachers that are teaching this because obviously their experience of their menstrual cycles has been horrible, painful,
Yeah.
and so she says to me, "Mum, I think it's coming." And I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "You just have said how moody I am all the time." I said
That's
I
awesome.
said, "Oh, it's okay. It's part of it. I don't think you're
The
quite there
princess.
yet, but you have been moody." But it's just interesting, so I think stories are
Mm.
particularly beneficial, but we need to be telling the right stories, and also we need to then shine a torch on ourselves. What are our cycles like? If we're
Yes.
sitting there week after week or month after month really hating on ourselves in that phase of our menstrual cycle where we are bleeding, why is our daughter going to, or our
Yeah,
child going to actually appreciate that or want that for themselves? They would want
absolutely.
to, they wouldn't. So
Yeah,
we need to shine the light on ourselves and also ask the question: is my cycle as healthy as it could be? What can I do to set the example? If not for myself, which A, we should really be doing first and foremost.
right.
B, for those that are around me that I'm also influential to.
Absolutely. And that's funny. My 14-year-old son, he's very intuitive and he knows more than I think most boys do at his age, but only on his own questions. He's very quiet. He loves to ask questions. And one of their favorite questions they'll all ask me is, does it really hurt to have babies? Does it really hurt when your lining comes out? Like the same thing. We've had those very kind of technical conversations. And I've been able to explain that it is different for everyone.
Yeah,
But we've made this standard a norm expectation. What really it isn't. It isn't normal. It might be common, but it shouldn't be normal for it to be a horrific experience or to be a terrible
100%.
experience. Yeah, and it
I
is
know
we
that.
need to change that conversation for sure.
Absolutely. Growing up, I know my mum used to say to me if we had pain, "I'm sorry, girls, it sucks to be a woman." Like, that was literally what she used to say, and that wasn't, I'm not saying that was what her mum used to say to her.
Right.
And I have found myself going to say that to Olivia and then realizing and stopping myself, um, or actually of saying it and then retracting, going, "Actually, sorry, sweetie, that's not true. That's just actually what my mum used to say to me," and
Mm,
that was just a default thing that came out of my mouth. Um, and 100% true. It is accepted that women have pain, and that's it's been somehow made normal. And like you said, it's a symptom. It's a sign that your body is trying to tell you something. Sure, it's common. Coming back to what we were speaking about at the start, it's a symptom of modern day life, and
right.
it's a reflection of our stress levels. It's a reflection of inflammation in our body, and it's a sure sign your body is feeding to you that something needs to be done. And that's sometimes easier said than done as well, but it is your body's way of communicating with you. And, your menstrual cycle is such a window into the internal landscape of your body, such a gift
Mm,
to be able to figure that out. And so
yes.
I'm really passionate again about teaching women how to do that based on their signs and symptoms, because they never lie. Your signs and symptoms never lie. They're not in your head. You're not making it up. Um, and it can be tricky because as women, we are different every single day of our cycle. And
Yeah.
so that makes it challenging. Whereas we continue to try and operate as if we're men, and we're not men. And so that's I think where the challenge also is allowing yourself to A, understand your cycle, B, know what you need on given days of the cycle, and that allows you to actually work with it, not against it.
Absolutely. It's funny, I remember it wasn't until I was teaching prenatal classes before I'd even had my own babies, but I was teaching prenatal classes probably about 5 years into before I had my first baby, which was a little unusual, but not unheard of. But I remember I actually sat down and looked up and learned the stages of our cycle. I Up to that point in
Right.
my life, I had never understood what the luteal phase was or what the
Right.
I didn't even
Right.
know what that was,
Well,
you know?
that's really interesting. I mean, many, many years ago, we created a masterclass called Debunking Ovulation, and we had no idea at the time the impact that was going to have.
Yes.
It started off as my PA said to me, "I think you should just run a fertility awareness class in the clinic." We had this space at the back of the clinic that was kind of like a workshop space. It was awesome. We could sit 40 women in there. And so I was like, you think? Like, do you think someone's going to come to this? And she's like, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So we, as an experiment, ran our first class and we sold out like straight away. And I think we went on and I started running these same classes every week for probably 10 weeks. It was exactly the same class every
Wow.
Saturday at the same time. And then at some point, I'm like, what am I doing? This needs to actually be filmed and then we can actually sell it online.
Yeah.
That became the process that we did for all of our masterclasses. But what's funny about the fertility awareness masterclass, which is called Debunking Ovulation, is that it's so daggy. If you watch it now, it's like 10-year-old recording, but the information hasn't changed. It's
Right.
so relevant that there's no point in changing it. You just have to look past the bad outfits and the hairstyles, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But if this information hasn't changed, because
Yeah.
we are talking about cyclic your cycle and the cyclic rhythms of your body, and that's never going to change. So this
Mhm.
information is never going to be irrelevant.
Yeah.
I think the more that we are in tune with that and that we can watch what our body is telling us, it becomes so much easier to live in your body. And you can somewhat plan around it too.
Yeah.
If you, I mean, my hope is that nobody experiences horrible period pain, but if you are experiencing that, well, at least be able to work around it so that you can still have a quality of life.
Right.
Um, and then I would encourage you to try and fix it. Of
Yeah, of
course,
course.
there's that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is the truth of it is we don't have to suffer. We don't have to stay like this. There are so many options available. But back in, I remember when I was, 17, 18, I had terrible acne, like cystic acne. And I was a competitive athlete. I was a dancer. I was all these things. And it was the bane of my existence.
Mhm.
And I remember going to dermatologists and all different doctors, and every single one would put me on a different birth control. And I was horrified by that option. At that age, I just had there was no reason in my head to be doing that. And I didn't know anything about it then. But I finally, when I first got married then, 10 years later, said, okay, fine. We're going on our honeymoon. We're not having kids right away. I'll go on the pill. I spent the first 3 months of our marriage thinking I was going out of my mind
Mm.
just
Mm.
from going on the pill. I was depressed. I was manic. I thought I was going crazy. And I started to put those dots together and thinking, man, I'm really glad I didn't do that when I was 18, when they
No,
told
right.
me
Well,
to. Crazy,
I
eh?
think you raise a really valid point there as well, because I think a couple of things. I mean, around the age of 16, teenagers definitely go through a phase which mimics PCOS. And this is where a lot of mothers will panic, and rightly so, because they don't know that this happens to us.
Right.
But this is often the phase where we gain weight, we have a bit of acne, there might be a little bit of facial hair, cycles can be a little bit wonky. Um, and we panic as mothers, we panic. What happens? We take our daughters to the doctor, and this is the age that the pill is prescribed, not
Mhm.
knowing that this is a normal phase in the maturation of our sex hormones. This is a phase that's really important to set us up for the what's
Yes.
to come next. Now, our sex hormones don't mature until around the age of 21. But if the average woman or young woman is being put on the pill at the age of 16, you're halting that maturation at the age of 16. So when this woman comes off the pill at 26 or 32 or whenever that might be, um, her hormones are as sexually mature as her 16-year-old self. So she
Mm,
starts back at that point again. She doesn't jump on as a 32-year-old in terms of, the timeline of her hormone maturation. She goes back almost to the start. And
wow.
a lot of women are shocked to learn this because they think that the pill has fixed their problems, or at least even if it's masked them, even if it's been and they have the awareness that the pill has masked the problem, they don't realize that they're starting as a 16-year-old when it comes to, acne breakouts, hair loss, like so many of those symptoms are gone through, and that can take a long time, and no 32-year-old wants skin
No,
like a 16-year-old, like, let's be honest.
no.
So it is important that we understand this and make informed choices that are right for us and have as much information as we can. This has becomes problematic also if there is an underlying hormone imbalance that was never treated, because
Mhm.
not only is it there when you transition off birth control, it's usually 10 times worse. So the
Right.
research does definitely indicate that the older you are to use birth control after the age of 21, the less problematic it is when it comes to your hormones.
Mm,
A lot of women will report that they have hormone challenges after coming off the pill, and that's likely one of the reasons why. So
right.
information's very important. I'm not here saying don't do it or you shouldn't. I'm here
Right.
saying please just have this information and make a good choice for
Yes.
what's right for you.
Well, informed decisions, right? I think anything we do, whether it's speaking to our kids about something at a certain age or whether it's making our own health choices, if we don't really know what those options are, how do we know?
Right, and I think
Right?
this has definitely rang true in more recent times. People are finding out and their minds being open just by the nature of things that are happening in the world right now that, oh, wow, I've done X, Y, and Z because I was told to do X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden there's options like
Yeah.
you get to advocate for you. And the thing is,
Yeah.
nobody is going to do that other than you. You have to get clued up on that. Of course, your health providers have your best interest at heart, but their toolkits might be limited. And so,
Yes.
this is, I think, really important to understand, are you seeing the right person for your concerns and challenges? Because half the time we're not, and we end up on birth control, basically. That's the answer for everything, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is we've talked about this many times in this show is our, like you said, our healthcare providers are amazing. Our doctors are amazing. We have them for a purpose. I always joke with my family doctor that I use them to diagnose. That's pretty much it. And then I go figure out the treatment myself,
Right,
if
which
I
is how I
can.
do.
But they know what they know, but they
Mm.
only know what they know,
Well, I
right?
mean, we were talking before we started, and I have a little boy with a respiratory condition, and, they've asked us to do some pretty gnarly things for him, and which most of them we haven't needed to because we've worked out a way ourselves.
Right.
And that's fine. That's because that's what we want to do. And not everybody wants to do that. Again, that's
Yeah.
fine. Um, but what's interesting is that there has been a couple of times where there has been some quite deep and kind of confrontational conversations. And at the end of the day, I've turned around and I've said, I'm an expert. You're an expert in your field.
Yeah.
I'm an expert in my son because I'm with him 24/7.
That's
You
right.
probably see him at best for 4 hours a year. I
Hmm.
see him 24/7. So, and the same goes for our own health.
Yes.
I am an expert in living in my body. Now, whether or not I've got a higher level of health or not, or awareness or not, but we get to become experts in our own bodies if we so choose. And I think that's really important that we then get to advocate for what actually feels right for us.
That's right.
So I think the challenge around that is we second guess ourselves. Of course, we go to our health providers because that's their job.
Hmm.
But if something doesn't feel right, or you've got this inkling that, always trust your gut feeling. It's
Yeah.
never wrong. It can be scary, but it's never wrong. And the more that you can do that, the more you trust that, the easier life gets, and you stop second guessing everything, and you can put yourself on a path of, I always say to patients, first of all, we want to get to a place where we're managing the symptoms. Then we need to put you into a place of recovery. You can't
Mm.
have recovery without actually managing the symptoms first. We have to get to that
Right.
place because, and then we get to recover.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a quick fix, but it is a long-term solution so that you're not left feeling horrible day in, day out.
Absolutely. And the beauty of the way our body talks to us, if we're only dulling those messages all the time, there's a place for that. There's a time for just getting some of those taken care of. But if that's all we've done, I think it's really important that we allow our body to speak. It,
Yeah.
it might be loud and annoying,
Mhm.
it might
Mhm.
be a really big
Well, it'll just
message.
get louder and louder,
That's
like,
right. That's
yeah.
right. Yeah. And I love that for women in particular. I know a lot of intuitive men too, but for women in particular, we really do have a power. I
Oh,
think
yes.
superpower in our intuition,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
with ourselves, with our children, whatever that is. And you're so right. We need to trust that. It's super important.
Definitely.
So I want
Definitely.
to know a few more questions. I wanted to know, so we talked a little bit about the pill, but what are some of these options that we have instead of? Is that something, that you can talk on?
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, we've got so many options, and I think that even the convenience of the pill isn't as convenient as we might think it is, given the host of side effects that come with
Yes.
it. There's many of which most women don't even actually know, or maybe not even aware of. Um, so, and also especially for teenagers, like a lot of mothers will say, "I just don't want my daughter falling pregnant," and I'm like, "Well, it's such a disservice not to teach them about their cycle first and
Right.
foremost, to
Right.
realize that it's very likely that there are only 3 or 4 days within that cycle that she's fertile for anyway. So
Yeah.
why would we flatline our hormones for the entire month round when there's only 3 or 4 days? And also, if you're not learning this, then when are you learning this? Like this, when you use birth control, it flatlines everything. I think this is the biggest issue: is women never get to really learn who they are.
Right.
As a 16-year-old, you don't really understand your emotions. You don't really understand physically what you're feeling. You know it in the moment. You've got no life experience to draw upon, to look back at. So there's no perspective as such. It's just very big, and very real at that time. But there's no gauge for that. So I think first and foremost, cycle awareness is so important for us as women and such a gift. And whether you choose to use birth control down the track, at least you then understand your cycle and you have
Yeah.
this. It's very, very important. So, from the age that we start to menstruate, tracking this, looking at the ebbs and flows, working out when we're ovulating. Because even the time that we're ovulating tells us so much about what our hormones are
Mhm.
actually doing. So, first and foremost, let's start with that. It is not as scary as we are led to believe it is. And I've been practicing fertility awareness forever. I've got two children. They were conceived the month that we both tried for each of them. Um, and I don't say this because I think I'm fabulous. I say this because it's possible, right? And
Yeah.
also because I would hope that as someone who has specialized in fertility, that I would be able to have the baby straight away.
Yeah.
I'm not great at getting them out. I'm just great at making them. Um,
Perfect.
so I think the main thing there is I do not want any more children. We have practiced this and with no problems whatsoever. And I'm at a point now in my life where how can you not know it? Like, this is the part I look at what my body's telling me every day. It's so obvious when I'm fertile. It's like I feel sad for people that can't actually
Yeah.
see this or know this because it's such a no-brainer for me. So, there's that. There's a lot of women who don't trust themselves, and it's because either they've never been taught this, or maybe they have been on birth control, they've come off birth control, and they're like, I just don't trust. I
Mm.
just don't trust my body, which breaks my heart. But let's learn how to trust our body. So there's some amazing fertility tracking devices out there that
Mhm.
allow you to track your cycle. Now, full disclosure, I am biased because I am the owner of Daisy Australia,
Yeah.
but
Which
but
is
there are
amazing.
many.
Yeah.
I know, well, the co-owner, but there are many tracking devices out there that allow you to do this. What I think women need to specifically understand, however, is that is not just simply an app. An app just guesses when you are going to be fertile based on your last cycle. Do never just trust an app alone. You need to be inputting data into an app to actually accurately allow it. If you're allowing that to predict your cycle, you need to have the right technology
That's
behind that. So, um, obviously, like I said, I wanted to be transparent around that. There are other devices out there as well. I think the main thing is look for a brand that has technology that's behind it, that's been around for a long time.
yeah.
Um, Something like the Daisy, like I said, it's based on 40 years of technology. Like, for me, it was a no-brainer when we were offered the opportunity to represent the brand. Because of 40 years is excellent, and accuracy is really important. But what it allows you to see is very accurately, it can pinpoint your non-fertile days very,
Right.
very accurately. And the more that you track with any of these, even just a temping method, the more that you track, the more that you can see. So the more data you have, what often these the apps that allow you to put the data into them, what they allow you to see is the trends that happen over months, especially if you don't have a fully regular cycle. But it also means that you can then look and go, oh, I can see my symptoms line up with when my temperature goes up, for
Yes.
example. So we can see where the symptoms are. And so I think that gives a lot of women peace of mind.
Mhm.
I think it's a great regime to get into, is checking on your body every day anyway.
Yeah.
And this is just one way that you can combine ancient wisdom with modern technology and have that peace of mind and some way to store your data. Because
Yeah.
I mean, once upon a time when I was learning fertility awareness, we used to track it in sheets, and women still do this
Yeah.
now. There's nothing wrong with a
I
pen
had
and
a notebook
paper,
beside my bed.
right?
It was a notebook and a thermometer.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just
Yeah.
I don't wanna do that if I don't have to. If there's a device that makes it easier
Yeah.
for me, there's quite a few women, on the fertility awareness path that don't like the devices, and I can understand that, but there are women that do like the devices, and it's not about what's better. It's not one's not better than the other, it's what's your preference,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, because really, I think we can all agree all we want is to be able to understand our bodies better. So obviously, tracking devices are very good. And then also, I mean, the other alternative is barrier methods. And I know it's very old school, but I think for teenagers, we should be encouraging them to use barrier methods.
Mhm.
STDs, STIs, sexually transmitted diseases are a real thing.
Yeah.
And the pill doesn't stop that
Yeah.
from happening, or a marina doesn't stop that from happening. So I think that's very important to be able to advocate for protection to be used,
Yes.
definitely, especially if there is, first encounters or first becoming sexually active, or even if there are multiple partners. I mean, you and I know this, but the amount of patients that I see that still wouldn't do that is frightening. And it's not
Mm.
until you have seen patients that have been presented with syphilis or STIs that have impacted their fertility long term that you're like, this could have been prevented.
Yep.
So I think encouraging young women to use barrier methods also is a very smart thing to do and a very safe thing to do. And the accuracy of all of these things are really high. A condom is very effective. Fertility awareness is very effective. They're all within a small margin of each other, just as effective as each other. So practicing safe sex is also very important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's something that we talked about the banana and the condom conversation. Where, because my kids are homeschooled, it was a funny conversation because my kids were watching a movie, and in the
Yes.
movie they were in sex ed class and they pulled out the bananas and did the whole thing, and it was the funniest conversation between my older two about what are they doing?
Oh, I know,
what are they
right?
doing to that poor banana?
Oh my gosh.
And it was a great conversation because I got to explain what that was and what they are and why you use them. And
Yeah, right, right.
yeah, it was a mini homeschool sex ed class at that point.
Oh my gosh.
The
Oh
things you have
my
to
gosh.
think about, right?
I mean, you can always rely on a little bit of television education that
That's right.
comes left of center every now and again. We were watching something on the weekend and it was like, whoop, turn it off. But the kids are like, what is going on? It was really funny. I was like, oh, well, that was fast track education right there.
Let's talk about it or not.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I love it. Well, and bring some humor into, what can be an uncomfortable situation if it was presented in a different way. I mean, I
Yeah.
think back, my older sister and I do a once a month on our podcast together, and it's called "What Your Mama Didn't Tell You."
Love it.
And my mom's amazing, but we love it because the two of us
See,
will
this
talk
is the
about
thing.
right.
Our
We'll talk
mums
about
are
what she
amazing,
didn't
but it was
know.
also there were so many
Yeah.
things that weren't okay to talk about.
That's right. And it was just the idea that I got most of my information from my older sister, and it wasn't because my mom's a very smart, she was very open, and
Yes.
it wasn't that. It just wasn't a conversation. We never
Mm,
asked
mm,
and she never offered
right.
those bits of information. I bet if we had asked, we would have been told what we needed to
Yeah,
know. But right,
yeah.
you're raised in that era, that
But also,
generation where
like,
you don't need to know that.
even, like I mean, even, like, getting a mirror out and having a look down there, my mum would never have suggested that.
Yeah.
Never. I don't actually think I ever did that until I was in labor,
Yeah. Same.
right?
Exactly.
And it's
Well, until I was
like
in labor with other clients. And I was like,
right,
oh,
well, that's
there
always
we
a
go.
great
Yeah.
But that was never even a thing. There's no way that that would have been encouraged,
Right.
and it just meant that it was this topic that wasn't okay. It was kind of dirty, and that
Mhm.
wasn't never. She gave me the tools in terms of I was wildly fascinated with getting my period, with the reproductive organs. Like I used to sit there, and I remember reading through. I had this pamphlet that probably was 16 pages at best. And I just remember I used to sit there and read through it over and over and over again, which is quite funny now, fast forward, you know, however many decades. And here we are. I never thought this would be the case. But to me, I just find it wildly fascinating. And still to this day, we're still learning. There's so many things we still don't
Yes.
know. Um, but there are a lot that we do that we can at least start to change the shape of all of this moving forward for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think these conversations are a big part of that. If us as
100%.
mamas or as women can feel comfortable with our girlfriends or on a podcast or whatever it is to get be equipped in some of this information that we didn't get,
Mm,
then when the
mm,
questions do come up, it doesn't need to be a shut down conversation. I can't talk about that because I don't know. Um,
absolutely.
or I go talk to
Absolutely,
your
and even
sister.
absolutely, and even for the males in our life as well, like, having these conversations in front of them, that's so fine. We put out a candle in lockdown, it was "Does not smell like vagina" on the back of Gwen Paltrow's "Does smell like vagina," and my dad heard me saying it in the background, and in the I hear him in the background on the phone, he's like, "Oh, you are not doing that, Nat," and I'm like, "Oh, no, I really am, Dad."
Oh, wait for it.
He was like, "That is mortifying." I'm like, "Not really. I'm fine."
Oh my goodness.
I'm
I
sure I
love
make
it.
them cringe to this day, but I'm sure they're proud on some level as
I
well.
love it. No, but those are the things that I love, that we're changing this. We're changing the conversation.
Yeah.
My office is full of, birth education tools. I have a silicone breast sitting on my desk, and my
Love
son
it.
had his little 12-year-old friend in here the other day, and he grabbed it and thought it was a stress ball because it was upside down. And he's sitting there going like this, and all of a sudden my son just starts bursting out. He's dying laughing, and his friend turns it around.
Oh, that is
And I'm like,
hilarious.
well, you're gonna hang out in my office. This is what's
Yeah,
gonna
get used
happen.
to it. Yeah,
But
totally.
I love in some sense too that, I mean, yes, that was funny, but that he, he's a 14-year-old boy who respects a woman's body
Mhm,
based on the knowledge he has. Like he'll say
mhm.
to me many times, I think it's just amazing that you were able to birth us. Like he's 14,
Oh,
the thought
bless.
that it was his birthday yesterday and he said thank you to me for
Oh,
going through labor,
beautiful,
like
beautiful.
I think we're going to raise, a different generation of men who have a better vocabulary around
Definitely,
our cycles
definitely.
as opposed to it just being, oh, she's moody, or, oh, it's PMS
Totally.
time,
Yeah.
like we don't have that vocabulary for our kids at this point. And I hope that they can keep growing that way. But
Good.
yeah.
Well, that's testament to you, so well done because, there's a long way to go with the boys, I
Yes.
think,
Yeah,
definitely.
I absolutely agree. Well, when we talked about having my daughter on to chat in this conversation, it was the first thing he said was, well, when do I get to talk about
Oh, well, he can
girls'
come back. We can
reproductive
do this
health? I'm like,
again,
you want to
and
talk about girls' reproductive health? You can come on too.
we should do that. You should
We
totally do
totally
that.
should. Well, because it is a conversation that our kids are having, like you said, regardless. They're going to have
100%.
it in some form. My daughter has
Yeah.
friends who are older. Both of her close girlfriends have their periods. So it's an almost daily question from her. She's only
Mhm.
10, but she wants to know,
Mhm.
well, how much longer? When will I get it? And I
Yeah.
could very easily say, don't rush it. You don't want it. It's not something you want to look forward to. Like all those thoughts do come to my head.
Mhm. Mm.
Stop, like you said, it's just stopping yourself from
I
saying
know.
that
Yes.
same
Yes.
repertoire, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, we'll definitely have to
Definitely.
we'll do a kid version of this.
Yeah, yeah, let's do that. Let's
We need a
definitely do
teen
that.
version. I love it. All right. So one last thing as we will wrap it up. I want to know what would be, if you had to pick, and this might be a hard question, but if you had to pick one piece of advice for the ladies who are listening, the mamas who are listening, for taking care of themselves in their reproductive health, what is one tip that's your favorite thing, or maybe one or two?
Sure. Firstly, I wanna say be the example. Like, if you can't do it for yourself, which you should be, do it for your children, and be the example. So if there is things that aren't right, please let this be your call to action.
Mm,
And I think also we really need to be mindful. Stress for me is the driver for all hormone imbalances. So how can we check in with where we're at with that? We are currently encouraged to do everything, and there's nothing wrong with that. But something has to give. And what that does to our cortisol levels is crazy. And elevated cortisol levels is, for me, probably the number one reason I see all
yeah.
the issues that I do in the clinic. So there's one simple thing I ask women to do, and that is I want you to become conscious of when you are actually overwhelmed, when you are actually stressed, because chances are you hit that at least 3 or 4 times a day and you're not aware that you're there. And you
Mm,
can't do anything about what you're not aware about. So simply becoming and asking yourself, Nat, I'm going to start to become more aware of when I am stressed or overwhelmed or feel like I am, brain fried. That's all I have to do. I just have to ask myself if I bring that to my consciousness, and I'm going to start to just by default become more
right.
aware of how often I hit that high point every day. I can't do anything about it, like I said, until I know. But at least once I know, I can also go, does this warrant stress or am I just
Mm,
in a bad habit? Because I mean, chances are you are in a bad habit.
yeah.
But does it warrant stress? And does this actually deserve release of my precious cortisol? Because when I am releasing more of that, everything else is sort of like out the window. So
Yeah.
simply just check in and see if you can actually become aware of when you're stressed, and then just ask yourself the question, does it warrant stress? Because that simple technique is very powerful in helping us to reset. And it's not that you're not going to be stressed again. You might be stressed 5 minutes later. It's more about how can we create pockets where we're in rest and digest rather
Mm,
than fight or flight, and how can we create more of those pockets, because the more we do it, the more that we'll actually be able to bring ourselves back down again. It's like I said, it's the modern day issue for women. We live in fight or flight, and it throws everything else off balance. So A, we need to be an example, and B, we need to be checking in with ourselves.
That's amazing. And that, I think, in a nutshell, is what balance, and that what seems like this elusive balance, that's what that is. It's not that we can avoid it, it's that we're going to live in it, but we're going to find a balance to, like you said, the rest and digest part. I love that. Perfect.
Awesome.
I love it. Well, thank you so much again. And I really hope we can have some more conversations. There's so much that we can cover when it comes to hormones and all the good stuff that we need to talk about.
Yeah. You're so welcome, Holly. Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to learn more? Find me on Instagram and YouTube at Mom Days Podcast.